This is 1059 The Region, where parents talk and explore practical, proactive, and evidence-based solutions. This is Where Parents Talk with Lianne Castelino.
It's great to have you along for this edition of Where Parents Talk on 1059 The Region. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lianne Castelino. Each week on this show, we talk to moms and dads from all walks of life about raising kids today through a scientific and lived experience lens. Our guest today is a Canadian sports journalist, current studio host of Hockey Night in Canada and the NHL on Sportsnet. David Amber has previously covered a variety of sports, including the Olympic Games, the Stanley Cup, and World Series for TSN, ESPN, and the NHL Network. He is also the father of 2 teenagers. David Amber joins us today from his home in Toronto. Thank you so much for being here.
Leanne, thanks for having me.
Now, David, I understand this is your first interview on the subject of parenting. So thank you, first of all, for accepting this invitation. I wonder, as a father of a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old, generally, what are your views on being a parent today with everything that's going on in the world?
First of all, Leanne, I got to tell you, I mentioned to my kids that I was doing the podcast interview with you, and they got a good chuckle out of it because they actually expressed some interest. I said, well, I'm going to get asked about parenting. And my daughter said, well, they should probably ask me how you are as a parent, not you. So there you go. It's great to be here. As far as today goes, I think the words that come to mind are it's challenging but rewarding, which are the 2 words that come to mind. I think it's probably a very unique time to be a parent coming out of the pandemic. And you think about the last few years for all of our kids and all the things they've missed, all the adjustments they had to make. And I think about my daughter who went off to university. We both had daughters go off to university in the last few months. And I just think they were kind of stripped a little bit of their independence for a couple of years. And I think it might have made the adjustment initially a little bit more difficult than it might have been for you or for me in our generation. Certainly, I remember being so excited to go off to school. And I think she maybe felt a little bit of trepidation, just because it had been such a different 2.5 years with the pandemic. So I think there's been some unique challenges at this era of parenting. But at the same time, the greatest rewards you're going to feel as a person are, when your kids have a great day and accomplish something and show some grit and determination and sort of strive for what they want to do and show great passion in things. And it's funny, you don't realize that till you become a parent, right? It's you think about your own joy, and then when you have a child and then sort of experience their joy, it's on a whole nother level.
Without question, and that is so rewarding for sure. Let me ask you, you've got a 17-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son. Have you always wanted to be a father, David?
That's a tough question. I certainly always thought about being a dad. So I don't know if that whole paternal instinct was there from day one, but I certainly, I've always liked, I remember when I was sort of in grade 6, 7, there were some grade 2s and 3s. I used to kind of mentor a little bit or be able to kind of chaperone around a little bit. And I had that sort of felt good to be in that leadership role to someone and mentoring them in a different way, that not exactly being a parent, but just that feeling. So I guess it's always been a little bit a part of me, and I always knew I wanted to have a family. So it's nice that it's happened.
In what ways would you say that your childhood has impacted the way that you parent?
Well, I guess the number one thing would be, I think back to when I was a kid and the things that made me most excited or most uplifted or most interested. And I try to bring those thoughts and memories and say, well, how can my kids have those same opportunities? So in my case, I played a ton of sports growing up, in hockey and baseball and football. And my wife's very athletic too. She played a lot of different sports. And so we try to get our kids into different sports or into different things that they're interested in, passionate about. My daughter took to sport, but she really took to performing. So we were like, okay, well then let's, push towards that a little bit with her singing and her performance. And I think that was something that I remember from my childhood, that the moments I loved and embraced the most were those hockey tournaments and those moments. And I said, okay, well, hopefully we can replicate some of that with our kids.
Absolutely. I can relate to the hockey parent piece for sure. It's interesting. You talk about your childhood, you talk about maybe not having a pronounced paternal instinct, but the fact is, you've got 2 kids. There's a whole pile of responsibility that goes with that. You've got a very busy, dynamic career that's, time demanding from that perspective. So how do you go about trying to balance all of that out, especially when they're in their developmental years as teenagers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a struggle that so many families deal with, right? There's so many, two-parent working families or single-parent families, and they're trying to manage. Like, of course, you have to have the career, and you want to follow, chase something and be passionate about something on your professional side, but at the same time, you don't want to sacrifice anything in your personal life. I don't know if we've reached the perfect balance. You'd have to ask my kids that. But one thing I've said to them from day one, and I've tried to live up to this, is when I'm not working, I'll be there. So it's sometimes, to be honest with you, working nights and weekends and lots of holidays as someone who's a sports broadcaster. Yes, you miss a lot of dinner parties on a Saturday night, and you do miss some kids events as well. But at the alternative side of things, there were some 2 p.m. track meets when I'd be the only parent there. There was some off time. Certainly a lot of 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock post school soccer matches, etc. I would make sure I'd be there. So I've said to my kids, I'll get to every single thing I can get to, and often, I think they understood it wasn't going to be easy, and I missed some things along the way, but I tried my best to make sure I could fit in as much as possible and make it a priority.
You talk about missing key family events over time. I wonder about guilt. Is that something you experience generally? Because it certainly seems to be different for mothers. And if so, how do you go about dealing with that?
I'm going to answer this honestly. I don't feel a lot of guilt. I feel bad saying that, but I don't, because I sort of said I work within the parameters I can and take the good. I've sort of said when things are out of your control, I can't control when the schedule of the events are that I'm covering. Everything I can control, I can do my best to make sure I'm right there, I'm present, I'm in the moment with the kids. And they've seen the efforts there. I mean, I remember one Saturday night I was in Winnipeg at a hockey rink in Winnipeg, and my son had a hockey tournament near Buffalo. And I took a 5 a.m. flight from Winnipeg to Toronto and then jumped in a car and drove 2 hours to make it to the final. I made it on time, thankfully. So I think they understood there were sacrifices made. But I don't know if that is a gender-specific feeling, because my wife, who has a pretty serious job, much more demanding in many respects than my job, she does feel a certain level of guilt when she isn't able to be there for every last thing. So I just sort of said we can control what we can control, and I'm not going to punish myself for that. And I think my kids have been more than understanding that putting the effort in is the most important thing.
Absolutely. David, how would you go about describing your parenting style?
Well, Lianne, it's funny. I say to my kids a lot, everything in moderation. So I don't have a specific approach. It's not like I'm a disciplinarian, or I'm not like a loosey-goosey, let's hang out. And there's always going to be boundaries, but certainly when they were younger. But I think it's everything in moderation. When your kids are young, yeah, we can go get an ice cream, but we're not going to go get an ice cream every day, or whatever the example might be. Yes, you're going to have to do homework or but we're also going to mix in some fun. Like, I try to make it so I would say to my daughter a lot when she was at 12 and 13, and, we'd butt heads once in a while. I'd say, be reasonable, just be reasonable. So I think I've tried to take sort of what I would, describe as a reasonable approach to parenting, and try and you set boundaries, and, you hope that they understand them. And as they get older, they certainly understand and respect, why you probably did things that they didn't always agree with. But I thought everything in moderation. And, when it comes to things, when they get to teenagers drinking and things of that sort, I wasn't going to take that approach of, you don't drink and don't do this. It's like, look, I know these things are going to be present for you, and there's going to be different choices to make. And you try and give them the judgment to make smart choices that aren't going to, become problematic for them, whether from a personal safety standpoint or in that nature. That's the number one thing. So I think my wife and I have tried to impress good decision making as best possible on our kids, and you kind of cross your fingers and hope for the best.
Definitely. You are listening to Where Parents Talk on 105.9 The Region. I'm Lianne Castelino, in conversation with David Amber, studio host of Hockey Night in Canada and the NHL on Sportsnet, and father of 2. Now, picking up on your previous point, as you know, there is no playbook for being a parent. So do you use, or did you use, any resources for inspiration or support when it comes to raising kids?
Well, we've been really lucky. We have a really strong network of friends, and many of them had kids in the year or 2 or 3 before us. So we had a lot of advice, solicited and unsolicited, about what it's going to be like when you become a parent. And everyone says it right. You're never going to be ready. People can tell you, oh, it's like this, it's like this, until you're sitting there and there's a baby in your arms and a dirty diaper and they're going crazy at 2 a.m. You don't know what that's like. You can't prepare for those situations. But we did have a lot of people sort of, heap good advice on us and sort of prepare us for certain things. I'd say the biggest adjustment, I don't know about you, Lianne, but for me, having our daughter was an adjustment, certainly a lifestyle adjustment. But having our son 20 months later, so we had then, like a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, that the first 6 months of that, it was just about, keeping your head above water. You're treading water for a while there. Just, it's amazing what your body can do on little sleep, and you get through it. But it was, if I think about the most difficult time parenting, and obviously, when they're teenagers, that's a whole nother ball of wax. But the most difficult time, if I had to really look back at it in many respects, certainly the physical toll and maybe even the mental toll it took, was when, we had a 3 and a 1-year-old or a 4 and a 2-year-old where there's high demands. They're not at school yet. And, 24/7, you're kind of on high alert. And, we had our daughter, our son was waking up in the middle of the night a bunch of times, and our daughter at, 6 a.m. All right, I'm ready to go. Let's party. And it's like, oh my goodness, how are you gonna get through this? So, you get a lot of different advice. Nothing's going to prepare you perfectly for it, but I think you manage, you find a way. And it's, again, it's the best, most rewarding, challenge you're going to face in your life.
You're bringing back all these memories for me, David, of when my kids were young that I only recently, finally dealt with, in terms of that sleep deprivation that just seems to be endless. In our case, we had 3 in our household. So I totally
2 felt like 3. That's my point. I think one was manageable, but when we had the second one, I was like, oh, wow, this is no joke.
Yeah. So another sort of interesting aspect of what you experience as a parent, I'm thinking, is the idea of being a celebrity and, being a dad as well. How do you go about managing that? Has that been challenging? Is there a different sort of approach you use as a result of that?
Okay, if my kids were here, they would be laughing hysterically at this question, because I don't consider myself much of a celebrity, and they certainly don't. They let me know that on a pretty regular basis, that I'm a D-lister at best. It hasn't been a big issue. Sometimes certainly, you're out at your kids' event or at their school, and I've spoken at both their schools at different times for different occasions, and I think they've taken it all in stride. They just look at me as the goofy dad. They don't really think of me in any other different fashion. So they get a good kick out of that. It hasn't been a big issue at all. I think at times it's been fun for them. We're out at a sporting event and people recognize you. They think the whole thing's kind of funny, but hasn't really been a huge part of raising them at all.
Our conversation with sports broadcaster David Amber will continue in a moment. Remember, you can catch the full video version of this interview on whereparentstalk.com. The podcast will also be available on more than 50 podcast platforms as well. We will be back after this.
Want to learn more about the show? Email info@whereparentstalk.com. Stick around. Lianne Castelino and Where Parents Talk will be right back on 105.9 The Region. Welcome back to Where Parents Talk. Listen live at 1059theregion.com. Here's Lianne Castelino.
Welcome back. Parenting Perspectives from a Father of 2. Our guest is David Amber, Canadian sports broadcaster on Hockey Night in Canada and Sportsnet. Now, David, we talked a bit about celebrity culture in today's world. The other unique challenge of parenting today comes in the form of social media and all that it entails. What do you look at in terms of rules and parameters around social media? What does that look like in your house with your kids?
Well, there's no playbook on this, right? We're the first generation sort of figuring this out. And, there is no perfect solution for it. Whether we were too loose about things or too strict about things, that we'll find out, I guess, down the road, because this is the first generation going through social media. I think we tried again, and we talked about judgment. I think my wife would always say, that you don't want to have anything out there that your grandmother wouldn't want to see. Essentially, it's probably a bit of a rule you can use, but it's difficult. And I feel for the kids, because trying to navigate through all the social media, It's not easy. It is not easy. And I'm happy that we didn't have to deal with that as kids ourselves. So I don't think we had a strict playbook. I think we like to have a sense of what our kids are doing. The kids are always smarter. I don't even mean my kids specifically, but the kids are always smarter than the adults when it comes to, well, I follow them on Instagram and Snapchat and I know what they're up to. Well, they have like 5 and 6 different accounts. They have ways of managing if they don't want you to know exactly who they're talking to or what they're doing on social media. So again, I think it's a matter of you have a level of trust with your kids and you try and kind of understand that there'll be a level of accountability and there's certainly going to be consequences potentially to something they do online, that's their fingerprint for the rest of their lives. My wife will bring up, a future employer is going to know what your Instagram looks like, what your Twitter looks like, your whatever social media you're on. So I think you try and impress that upon them. And again, you hope you're raising kids that have a level of empathy, a level of, understanding. They're not going to be doing things that would put them in danger or put others in a bad situation either. So that's what we're hoping for. And I think there's not a rule book for it, but certainly just hopeful, good judgment.
It's interesting. One of the aspects of parenting that has always been challenging to me in many ways is the follow-through piece on any sort of discipline issues that may occur. So what has been the most challenging piece of parenting for you?
Well, you bring up a good point. There certainly has to be consequences. You can't have idle threats and not back them up because, you're not going to condition your kids in a great fashion if they do things that they shouldn't be doing and there are no consequences to those actions. The most challenging part, I guess, is just you make mistakes and you have to understand, it's funny, we all can sit there and critique our parents and how they parented us, and we're very good at pointing out, well, that you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And then you become a parent, you realize how difficult the journey is. So I think you just have to understand there's going to be mistakes along the way. You have to try and have as close a relationship with your kids as possible. So there's a level of trust and a level of care and empathy and compassion both ways, right? You want your kids to care for you as well and maybe understand why you have curfew at this time, or you need to different rules and regulations within your house. And I think just getting that bond with your kid is maybe the most critical thing. And it starts at an early age. And I've been lucky enough to have a really close relationship with both my children, and we laugh more than anything else. And I think that's a really key thing. I guess the challenge really is to get that bond early on and to let that really cultivate and nourish into something special. And it makes parenting easier because it's not necessarily a friendship, but I think you maybe, if nothing else, have an understanding of the nature of your relationship as a parent and a child.
It does sound like you and your wife have prioritized healthy relationships with your children. And in preparing for this interview, something that really struck me about what you do for a living is you interview a lot of people in the age group that your kids are now in, namely late teens, young adults. So I wonder, is there anything in terms of what you see there that impacts your approach as a dad? And maybe that you're saying, I've got to file that away for future reference.
You know what, Lianne, that's a really interesting point. And it wasn't always the case. Like, my daughter's almost 18, my son's 16. And you're right, there's going to be a bunch of NHL players this year. A handful of them at 18 are going to be in the NHL. And that blows your mind, right? I think about my daughter, and she's a mature young lady, but she's still a kid in many respects. And then here these young professionals are out, living out their dream. If nothing else, it probably, from a professional standpoint, maybe I can take a step back when we're so incredibly hypercritical, which is what we tend to be in it's a very intense field, the professional sports field, and the demands are incredibly high, and it's a results-oriented industry. But we have to remember, at the end of the day, some of these young people they're quite young, and they're still figuring things out, and you see this in tennis when there's 16 and 17-year-olds playing professional tennis. And you go, my God, like, at such an early age to have that amount of pressure heaped on them. And if nothing else, maybe it's given me the opportunity to reflect a little bit that these are young people, and to maybe hold off some of the criticism, or at least understand, that they're such a youthful situation. But sports has gotten so much younger. Like, I work in the National Hockey League, and the NHL is as young as it's ever been. If you're 30 in the NHL, you're considered like a grizzled old veteran now. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to take a step back, and having two teenagers, I can see it a little bit better now and a little clearer. Like, wow, yes, they're the expectations are incredibly high, but we have to also sometimes maybe temper them a little bit and understand what some of the, things these young men and women are going through.
It is a really interesting point for sure. David, I'm curious, what is your most proud parenting moment from each of your children?
Oh my goodness, that's tough, because there's been, and I'm that's a really tough question, Lianne. I'm sure if I would turn the question on you, I'd like to hear your answer, because that is so many times when just you beam with pride. Obviously, if I'm going to use sort of recent memory, my daughter, the day she got into the university of her choice, she was elated because it's so competitive and so difficult. And I was so happy for her. And she worked incredibly hard through really tough circumstances during the pandemic to make sure academically she would be in as good a position as possible to get into the school she wanted to get into. So that was a really proud moment for us as a family, because I sat here and we saw the sacrifices she was making and the work she was putting in. And I think that was just a great lesson for her about that's sort of how life works, right? The more you put into something, the better off it'll be, that experience for you. My son, there's a whole, number of different things he's done, both athletically, which has been a lot of fun for me to watch as a parent, and just the young man he's become. He's a bit of a social justice warrior in many respects, and he'll come home and tell us some great stories about debates they had within his classroom at school, and the approach he took and the side he took, and how he articulated. And that just makes me really proud. Then you go and you have teacher meetings and they have really great things to say about him. And you just think, wow, we're raising a good young man. So that brings me a great deal of pride. And there's a number of different circumstances. If I go way back into the archives, the day our son finally became potty trained was a good one for us. It took a little time. So I was like, okay, finally, all right, you're on your own now. So that was a proud, I remember high-fiving my wife when that took place. So that was good. But yeah, there's a lot of moments.
Some of the examples that you just provided, I can totally relate to. Now, you mentioned your daughter off to university in another city this year. So that really means that you and your wife are kind of at a different age and stage of parenting right now. It's a whole different dynamic at home with one child. How have you been dealing with that?
I guess that's a nice way of saying I'm getting old. That's what I'm interpreting from the question. I don't feel that old, but yeah, I guess we're at that stage now. My excitement for her trumped everything else. Yes, the house is different. It's much quieter. She takes up a lot of space with her personality. And I kind of laughed and said, I didn't realize you were 95% of the personality in our family. And she kind of chuckles about that. But my excitement for her was over the moon. My wife was definitely a bit more, oh no, our daughter's leaving. And of course, we were very happy for her to be leaving. And that was never even discussed about being in the city, because we wanted her to go off and have a true university experience and not be at home. And we wanted that for her. And that's something she wanted. But quite honestly, my excitement for her was high level. So I think I was just able to sort of say, it's sad she's not around. The dynamic of our family's changed within, our household, but she's out there, living her best life and experiencing something that, I remember experiencing at university, and my wife as well. And it's just great that she's able to have 4 years of that now.
It's so true. My name is Lianne Castelino, and this is Where Parents Talk on 105.9 The Region. Every week, we dig deep into raising kids today with thought leaders in the parenting space who share evidence-based practices, scientific findings, or their lived experience as moms and dads. Our guest today is David Amber, Canadian sports broadcaster and father of two. He is the studio host for Hockey Night in Canada and the NHL on Sportsnet. Now, David, you've openly shared so much of your lived experience as a dad of two teens. Are there any sort of words of wisdom that you could provide to parents listening or watching, like us, out there in the trenches of trying to raise happy, healthy children in what is a uniquely challenging time for parents and certainly an increasingly complex world?
I think my only best advice would be try and be in the moment as much as you can. And I've heard other people say this, and I'm going to say it now. It all happens so incredibly quickly. I think back to when the kids were, 3 and 1, and again, we were treading water. But then you snap your fingers and they're 5 and 3 in a completely different stage, and then 7 and 5, and they're off to school full days and in all these activities. And now I'm snapping my fingers again, and here we are. One's at university and one's a year away. So it happens quickly. Be in the moment. Really soak in all the great moments. There's nothing better than a day when your kids are laughing and enjoying the time and the experiences that you're having together. And it's not about going out and spending money. It's about just go to play frisbee in the park, or you're going to for a walk, or whatever the case may be, for a bike ride. Those are some of the moments that I'm going to remember. We've gone on some really fun, hilarious hikes. I won't get into the details, but we that didn't at the time seem so funny, but we look back and all can chuckle about it. And we just had a lot of great family experiences. And I think that's what I hope my kids will remember down the road when they're parenting, about things they want to bring to their children. And I think just being in the moment, because it happens so quickly, is the best advice I could provide to anyone.
A wonderful way to end this conversation. David Amber, studio host of Hockey Night in Canada and the NHL on Sportsnet, and father of two, we so appreciate your time and your perspective today.
Lianne, thank you so much for having me on the show. First, probably last time someone's going to solicit my thoughts on parenting, but I appreciate it. And congrats to you on your 3. That's great.
Thank you so much. I have a feeling you're going to be a parenting interviewee rock star. I don't know. I'm just thinking that's what's going to happen. Thanks a lot, David.
Thank you, Lianne.
That is Where Parents Talk for this week. Remember, you can catch the full video version of this interview, as well as the podcast, on whereparentstalk.com and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lianne Castelino. Thanks for listening here on 105.9 The Region. Hope you'll join us next time.
Sign up for Lianne's parenting newsletter and so much more at whereparentstalk.com. This is Where Parents Talk on 105.9 The Region.